Before we start, I wanted both you, Luke, and Scott to provide a little bit of an introduction about yourselves, about what you do, and then we can jump onto the case study. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
All right, let's start with you, Luke. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Luke McNaith. I'm the founder of Lolitech and chief software architect. Formerly Priceline.com, WeGo.com. Worked at UBS for a while here and there, so I've been around travel and banking most of my life, and been running this company now for 6-7 years, so it's great here to be with Scott. Thank you, Scott.
That's a clicker. Thank you. My name is Scott Allard. I've been a CIO at Allegiant since 2011. Prior to that, I started in travel at Priceline back around 2000. Made the switch from OTAs over to airline space starting at Spirit. I'm a local. Right now, I live right here in Las Vegas. Our headquarters is down the road, and I keep myself busy running the airline day to day. At least my portion of it.
Excellent. Why don't we jump right into the heart of today's discussion, the Allegiant case study. Scott, if you don't mind telling the audience a little bit more about what the context was and how you guys got started and what you learned, and we can take the discussion on from that point.
Sure. I feel like a lot of people say, they work for a unique company, and I feel obviously like Allegiant is a unique company, but in this case, I think what makes Allegiant unique is I'll do a compare and contrast for another airline for a minute. The airline that I think of, they rent space on a reservation system, they buy crew scheduling software, they glue together a handful of best-in-breed products. There's probably a dozen or 15 products that are required to, between distribution and operations at an airline. But it's a lot of third-party software. And Allegiant, since the beginning, has been unique. It's got this monolithic, wholly owned system, and I explain it to laymen like that all-in-one stereo system you had when you were a kid. The cassette deck is there, the record player is there, the FM radio is there, there's no RCA plugs, there's no interconnectivity, it's all one system. But none of it is necessarily best of breed. It's all homegrown. It doesn't necessarily follow industry standards. And when I got to Allegiant in 2011, it was on its second generation. It had started life as a flat file Unix-based system, and there was a rushed migration to a web-based interface that was done in the early 2000s. Bottom
It was
line
terrible.
is,
Global.
I'm thinking of a nice way to say that, right. It was thousands of PHP files with several million lines of code, all talking to one schema that looked more like a flat file system, that had everything from flights and passengers to aircraft maintenance and crew details and accounting and an OTA. We were selling hotel and rental cars out of the same system. So you've got a system that sort of grew up with lava flow development. There would be some feature that was added really quickly. We'll go back and fix that later, and then you'd build on top of that feature after feature. And the system really needed two things: a refactoring, because it hadn't been designed to do what it grew up organically. It wasn't designed to do what it was doing. And it needed a refresh of technology. So the project was really re-platform this airline and modernize the platform. At the same time, don't bring the business to a standstill. We need to continue to migrate, to evolve the product. We need to compete in new spaces. So don't ask us to stop the business, but please go replace the system underneath us while we operate.
Yeah, it was like you were in the Daytona 500, except it was the Daytona 5 years, and you couldn't pit, but you had to change everything, right? So
when we started, we had 6 developers that were familiar with the system. 4 of them were in Fresno, 2 in Las Vegas. And there was no documentation around the system. There was very little documentation around the processes of how to use it. So when you're forced with how do we upgrade this system, how do we modernize it, one possibility is you go to Big Iron, you go to big consulting, but there's no specs. How are you going to reverse engineer this? So I had lived through a knife edge cutover of a reservation system at Spirit Airlines, where we went from a proprietary platform to a Navitaire platform. And this was sort of an opportunity for me, from a career perspective, to take the path that I could not choose at Spirit. And we endeavored to rebuild it, to modernize it one module at a time, while continuing to allow the business to move forward. And we're 6 years into that, and I feel like it's been a successful, probably a never-ending endeavor, but it's been a successful one.
That's interesting, and I have a follow-up question, but I wanted to give you a little, actually echo what you just meant, what you just said. These initiatives are never easy. When I was with Expedia, we had acquired a bunch of companies, including Hotels.com, Hotwire, and each one had their own technology stack and equally outdated. And when we went on this initiative to have a unified platform, believe it or not, a few of our sites actually went down for days. And we're not talking about a few minutes or a few hours here and there. I'm talking about days, and this is after 2 hours of work and an army of engineers. So these are non-trivial initiatives, which brings me to the question. You mentioned you guys are still in the process. It's a 6-year work in progress, continuing. In an initiative like this, how do you define the scope initially, and how do you define what success looks like?
So the rough framework of the project at the beginning was extricate the marketing and distribution functionality from this monolith. And that will give us a decision point in the future to replace that homegrown reservation system with a store-bought, now that we've isolated our distribution, our cash register from it, or we can continue to move forward and modernize our own reservation system. So the plan all along was to not really make the build versus buy decision for the core airline system. It was modernize the stuff that matters, where you make money, where the customer sees it, and go back later and think about what to do with that res system. So initial success for us would have been modern 3-tier architecture, distribution platform, separated from that airline reservation system.
Got it. And this is kind of I don't mean to make this a cheesy question, but when you bring in a consultant,
yes,
a consultant essentially makes money by the number of hours they put. So the question becomes a build versus buy. And again, it's not meant to be cheesy, but it's an expense. Why exactly? Why a build? Why a buy versus a build decision when you have the technology expertise in-house? And the second question is, how do you make sure that the consultant you bring in, and this is more as advice maybe for people who are considering an initiative like that, what are the things to keep in mind before you bring in a third-party consultant to build something for you? And this is open for both of you guys.
So buy versus build, quite the religious debate to this day at Allegiant. I would prefer not to rebuild my own general ledger, but we continue to run our own custom general ledger. So we don't always, I don't always agree with the buy versus builds that we make as a company, but it's a process to get there. And I think that from our founders' point of view, ownership of technology was what enabled Allegiant to be the company that they were. They could innovate and charge for bags and seats. They could own their own distribution network and not sell through GDSs at the time because they had control of their technology. So there was never a classic cost analysis. Do we want to buy? Would it be cheaper to buy than to build? There was a religious adherence to control over technology that superseded that. And we did look at a lot of alternatives for consulting, and I mentioned sort of a bigger company approach, but the risks associated, that's more akin to a knife edge cutover. So you're going to hand an antiquated system over to someone, and they're going to take a year and bring you something back. How do you assess suitability for purpose? You got no requirements documents. You've got very little understanding of how the current system's being used. It seemed natural that partnering with so I should give you one other background tidbit here. Vegas is not necessarily a mecca for technologists. So I had 6 developers in-house. I couldn't go find 60 developers and ramp up a team. So there wasn't really an option of, once we've overcome the hurdle of do we want to build it instead of buy, there wasn't the option of is this an in-source build? This was find people that you know and trust and have proven track records and assemble a virtual team to accomplish this. So naturally, there was going to be a lot of consulting.
Lou?
Yeah, and that affords, follow the sun kind of development. If they can find a bug here in Vegas overnight, by the time they get back up the next morning, we've already got an answer, rocking and rolling. So that's great.
Yeah, and again, into the consulting world, and I'll talk about a company which I'll not name, but an experience I will share. A lot of times when you have a consulting project and you scope it out, there is a tendency to overbuild functionality. And we had hired a consulting firm at a very big corporation. We built functionality that we had asked for, and we built several more features that were built by the consultants, but I don't know whose recommendation, that were not within the original scope. So we built this feature and functionality which no one used. So the question is this: obviously, it's an expense to the corporation. So how do you keep? How do you ensure when you bring a third-party consulting company on board? How do you ensure that both of you are aligned on the deliverables and have that clear understanding of what's actually required versus what may not be in the best interest or the economic interest of the party making the payments?
This may have been a unique case, but the initiative really was not necessarily just re-platform. It was bring the DNA of an OTA to an airline. So there was an expectation from Allegiant that we would be, through technology, bringing additional capabilities that could transform the business. And we were given a lot of latitude as to what that meant from a functional requirement standpoint. In fact, we didn't bring Allegiant marketing team into the project. The reskinning of the distribution system was done almost completely within IT with consultants. And our job was make it future proof, but make it backward compatible. So we needed a new architecture for a distribution system that still talked to that old thing, but that contemplated additional functionality that you might want if you were an OTA or if you could think 5 years down the road as an airline guy.
Makes sense. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions from the audience. By the way, you guys can tweet us on Slido at EFTUSA if you guys have a question. It's going to show up on the screen. The other question I have is this. You mentioned Las Vegas is not necessarily the mecca of technology, and if you forgive me for suggesting this, airlines aren't very tech-savvy either. So my question is this, and I ask this purely to learn, and hopefully you can share some feedback and advice. In an organization as complex as an airline, because there are so many intermediaries, and there's a reason they're tech-averse, there is an enormous amount of complication with intermediaries and distribution partners, and the technology stack is complicated. So when you embark on an initiative like re-platforming, I would argue there is going to be enormous internal inertia and resistance. How do you navigate that?
So we have a closed distribution system. To your point about complexity and distribution, that's not where ours was necessarily. I think that the harder part of an airline to modernize is the operation, because then you're automating business processes. The easier part for a technology team to transform is distribution, because I can launch a new website, I can watch what the customers do, measure the changes, tweak the website without a lot of deep integration with the airline operation. Everyone in the airline is busy running the airline, which left the IT and the marketing folks to play in their own space with a little more latitude than I think the formality wasn't there. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. It's fascinating. You guys have a very close-knit ecosystem, unlike a lot of legacy airlines, so it certainly does make sense. Luke, I have a question for you. You guys are a service provider. What are the biggest challenges you face when you are asked to implement a new technology at a provider like Allegiant?
Well, every customer is different. Every customer's got different rules and regulations and parameters on what they want to get built, like what database technologies and what level of security they want to build. It's trying to find a customer who understands that QA isn't a luxury, it's a must-have. Automation is a must-have. It's not, we'll cut the build by 20% because we don't need testing, right? Those kind of customers you want to run away from as quickly as possible. But Scott's been fully bought in from day one. Yeah. It takes a lot of different processes to make sure you get a quality product out the door every month.
Yeah, excellent. And how do you guys use cloud?
So Today, we run 2 data centers of our own, and my snarky answer is usually clouds are great. Everyone should own their own. and we view server virtualization and a lot of attributes of cloud technology as just as important for in-house systems. Now, we've got, in terms of the rack spaces and Amazons and so on, we've got non-production systems, we've got analytics systems, and we're starting to experiment with elastic capacity into the cloud from our production environments. But that's primarily a lot of security and operational issues to jump through. But boy, in my position, my mailbox is filled all the time with marketing collateral, and it always says social media, mobile, big data, and cloud. Those are the buzzwords that are going to be in any email that I get. And I always kind of come back to like, well, what's the business value of this? I think if I read my email, it seems like a lot of people are just moving to the cloud because they think that that's the right thing to do. Well, we run our own data centers pretty well right now. We've got pretty good uptime. We're very agile. So I come back to what's the problem we're trying to solve for, and I think that it's a question of horses for courses. And I'll be curious to see if any airline starts running everything in the cloud.
Yeah.
We like our own hardware.
All right, we have a few questions. This one is for Scott. And the question is, how important is it for IT to get buy-in from the business users before embarking on design and development of new systems or features?
Allegiant is a little unique in that IT takes the lead on a lot of requirements, a lot of IT related, at least in my experience, a lot of companies where the decisions would have been made on the business side. Allegiant runs a very skinny operation, and a lot of that process comes right into IT. So I think that it's incumbent on us to make sure that we treat the users of our technology as consumers, as customers, and meet their needs, but we don't bog them down a lot with, help us design this, how would you like this to work? And sometimes that means iteration. Sometimes you push something and they say, that's not it, go back and fix it. But it's certainly culture inside that's a faster, more agile way to do it than spend a lot of time arguing with business folks over what it's supposed to do before you build it. Yeah. Thoughts, Luke?
Yeah, totally agree.
So actually, Luke, the next question is for you. Okay, so this is for Luke. I'm impressed by the demo of Dazzle. Question.
Yeah, we won.
What's the process of implementing a chatbot on a site if we have never had chat function?
Well, I mean, obviously you can buy or build. I mean, that's the $64 million question, right? I mean, you can totally build it in-house. There are all sorts of open source libraries out there. If you've got the smart enough team, they can cobble anything together. Obviously, we'd rather you came to us and asked us how to build it for you, but it's a relatively simple process nowadays. You know, I assume you've all got frequently asked questions, and you've probably got an e-commerce component, and we will come in and plug it in, and Bob's your uncle.
I'd never heard that phrase before. I'm going to use it sometime. This another question, and this is maybe for both of you, or either of you are welcome to take the first stab at it. Talking of business value of newer technologies, do you see any value of AI and bots?
Yeah. That's why we built that.
Other than bots, I guess, to extend this question a little bit, now AI is a very broad term. It can mean anything and everything. People are talking about bots. And there's been some talk about the use of naturalized language processing to have a virtual agent and stuff. Do you guys see a future for an initiative like this in the airline industry where maybe a lot of questions can be programmatically answered? And as a follow-up to that, or as a corollary to that, are you guys, do you have an initiative in place right now at Allegiant for that?
We do a predominance of our distribution on our website And an interesting side effect of that is a surprising percentage of calls in our call center are not revenue generating calls. They're not distribution calls. They're generally general questions.
Yes.
So we see a huge business return in automating some of those customer service touch points, in addition to other things we can do to educate the customer and provide tools that they don't have to be calling us to begin with. But I think that customer service for an airline is an obvious application of machine learning, and we have been playing around in more of a lab environment in a few different iterations of that over the last year. Everything from robots that will check people in via voice recognition. We've done proof of concepts along those lines to more of a Dazzle type product that I'm sure you will see in an Allegiant call center in the near future. But I think that AI at an airline also has, airlines generate tons of data. So there's a lot of application, even in the operation when it comes to maintenance and routing and planning and so on, where there's opportunities for AI. But we go where the return is. Right now, that will be peeling calls out of our call center via a tool like that.
Yep. So the next, that's a lot of audience engagement. I love that. Thank you, guys. These two questions kind of are two sides of the same coin, I guess. So the first part is, what's the cost of implementing a chatbot? And the second part of the question is, do you think we should implement a traditional chat function first before considering a chatbot?
I mean, how long's a piece of string in terms of the cost of implementing a chatbot? It all depends what you're after.
Certainly the way we've thought about that internally, and not that you and I have talked about this, is if you roll them out together, then as your bot learns, when the bot encounters something he doesn't have an answer to, route it to a traditional agent, queue it up for after-the-fact learning and tooling of the AI component, but meet the customer's needs first. So I see those as very complementary at launch. My opinion.
You're always going to have humans in there, right?
Yep.
It's still part of the process. If unknown question, straight back out of a human. The next person who comes along and asks that question, well, we've got the answer this time. So,
Building on the library, yes. So we have about 3 more minutes, so I'll take one more question from the audience, and then I have one closing question for both of you. So the question from the audience is, what drives revenue growth for Allegiant?
Allegiant very much has always looked at we're a leisure vacation provider. We happen to fly airplanes, but man, it's really lucrative and satisfying to sell a vacation traveler more of their experience than just the airline ticket. And this is near and dear to me personally, because what I see over the course of the last 10 years is as ULCCs have unbundled their airline product, they spend a lot of time and thought and technology dividing that airline revenue into smaller and smaller pieces and complicating the product. And over time, what you see is when you give customers choices, they start making choices, and now ULCCs look to rebundle all those products that they offered a la carte. and just a personal observation of mine, we do that as well, but where I see the revenue opportunity is certainly in the fact that I'm flying that customer to Las Vegas, and I know before he's going to Las Vegas or Orlando, I know he's gone before anyone else is. I want to sell him more of his travel experience, and I think you'll see us use technology to pursue that. That's been our revenue growth, and I think it will be going forward.
Excellent.
also during trip, they're in Orlando, sell them some Blue Man Group tickets.
Right.
Cool. So my final question is actually to both of you, maybe if you can spend some time talking about it. And the question is, in hindsight, you guys have been into this 6 years, I guess. What would you have done differently?
I would love to say that I would have done a better job setting expectations, because no one at the onset of this thought it would be a 6-year odyssey. But all along the way, we made very collaborative decisions with the business. There were trade-offs between re-platforming and enabling additional growth or additional innovation in the airlines. So we spent a lot of time changing the existing system. So we were re-platforming a moving target, in other words. And that really extended the time. And I think that, since a lot of my time is spent managing expectations, that I probably could always be more successful in articulating the trade-offs that were being made at the time. I'm not sure that we would have done anything different, but I think everyone would have expected this to be such a long odyssey.
Luke?
Yeah, so 7 years ago there was one person, me, so here we are 7 years later. What would I do differently? I totally would have started R&D sooner. I mean, we always playing around a little bit on the side, but it's only really the last 4 or 5 years where we've really spent a lot of time playing around with some stuff. And obviously you see with Dazzle, that's the first kind of big cab off the rank, so to speak, out of R&D. And that's going to drive a lot of our future product as we transition from a services company to also a product company over time. R&D, invest in it.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Luke, Scott, I want to thank you for your time and thoughts and insights. And for the audience, if you guys want to interact with Luke and Scott, they'd be outside, I guess, in the foyer for some time if you want to exchange business cards or ask any follow-up questions. So thank you so much.